Tensions are flaring in West Asia as Turkey and Syria intensify their operations in the Idlib province. In the latest escalation, multiple airstrikes by Turkey have claimed the lives of 19 Syrian regime soldiers. A Syrian convoy and a military airport near Marat al-Numan were targeted by Turkey. Both these targets were well outside Turkish territory and represents a sharp escalation in tensions. Now, just hours before the airstrike, a Turkish F-16 jet shot down 2 Syrian warplanes over Idlib. Now, this was in response to the downing of a Turkish drone by Syrian forces. Ankara also claims that it has destroyed a Syrian air defense system and more than 100 tanks. Now, this footage on your screen was released by the Turkish Defense Ministry. It shows armoured Syrian tanks and vehicles being pummeled by Turkish drone. Turkey has launched a full-scale operation against the Syrian advance in Idlib. Thousands of Turkish troops and military vehicles have been deployed in the northern province. Now, Turkey has named the operation Spring Shield. The attacks are a retaliation to Syrian airstrikes last week that killed 34 Turkish soldiers. In response to the attacks, Syria has shut down the airspace over Idlib, and Russia has refused to guarantee the safety of Turkish aircraft in the region. So far, both Turkey and Russia have refrained from fighting each other directly. There are also reports of a possible meeting between Vladimir Putin and Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Moscow on the 5th of March.
Да, действительно, нам пока не удалось выйти на продолжить эффективное взаимодействие в рамках трехстороннего с участием Ирана, Astaninskого формата.
Attığımız adımlarda bu hassasiyetlere, bu inceliklere bakarak bu adımlarımızı atıyoruz.
Now, we are being joined by Ömer Özkiliç, sorry, I hope I have pronounced that correctly, Syrian expert at the SITA Foundation and the editor-in-chief of the Syria Ghanem Day. And they are joining us now live from Ankara. Good evening to you, and thank you for being with us on the show. Take us through the latest in this worsening crisis between Turkey and Syria.
So obviously the Turkish government's approach is quite clear here. Turkey does not want to allow a new Bosnia, a new Srebrenica, and Turkey is acting in line with its responsibility to protect and its right of self-defense here in Syria, and in line with the Sochi agreement. What we are now witnessing is a massive Turkish army drone operation in Syria's Idlib. However, this is not a full-scale military operation at the very moment. The Turkish army's all might has not been exposed over the situation in Idlib, and I think the Turkish main approach is to push back the Assad regime and to reach a deal with the Russians to reinforce the Sochi agreement over Idlib. And this will save millions of lives, as today the United Nations have proven that the Assad regime, backed by Russia and Iran, have explicitly violated the laws of war and have targeted hospitals, etc., and have been pushed more than 1 million civilians to the Turkish border. So the Turkish side is saying, we already have 3.6 million refugees in our country. We cannot accept anymore, and we won't let happen a humanitarian disaster across our borders. So Turkey is acting humanitarian, and I think the entirety of the international community should support Turkey in its efforts to establish peace and security for the civilians there. And I think when the Turkish military operation ends successfully, there will be much more hope for a political solution in Syria, as the Assad regime will understand that a military solution by killing thousands of civilians isn't possible anymore.
With this situation, tensions are flaring. How is Greece tackling the influx of migrants?
So this is quite interesting, and obviously showing how generous the Turkish people and the Turkish government were for years. Turkey has been hosting the biggest refugee population in the entirety of the world, with a vast difference to the second biggest refugee host in the world. And Turkey's humanitarian aid was the biggest in the world as well. However, when we see just some dozens of thousands refugees going to Greece and Europe, that the Europeans are going mad, using weapons and harsh restrictions on the refugees, on civilians, and even killing some refugees. This is not in line with humanitarian law. This is not in line with the rights of a human. And Turkey has been shouldered this burden for years alone. And now Turkey is saying something very clear. Either you support us to help Syrians go back to Syria, to live a life in dignity, or you will take a part of this burden as well. And this needs to be understood by the Europeans very well. For years, the Europeans were in a position of inaction, of doing nothing and avoiding responsibility. However, this is nothing sustainable, and doing nothing may have also its own cost. So Turkey is showing the European Union that their approach is wrong and they need to change their attitude. For years, the Europeans were just giving Turkey a bit of money, and now Turkey is even saying, you can have your money and the refugees if you don't help us to accelerate the return of refugees back to Syria. And I think this should be in the interest of the entirety of the humanity to bring back the refugees to the home countries, to the home place and the home cities. And I think this act should not be seen as a Turkish provocation or Turkish pressure against Europeans, but it should be seen as a warning and as a call for aid. Turkey wants the Europeans to help Turkey to facilitate the return of refugees back to Syria. And the current approach of the Europeans is not only a grave violation of human rights, but also a grave violation of European laws as well.
Omer, thank you very much for joining us with that report for the latest coming in between Turkey and Syria.